Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and happy Valentine's Day. Welcome to Raven's Readings. I'm reading from the Inimitable Jeeves, a collection of short stories written by P.G. Wodehouse in 1923. In them, Jeeves, a valet, and his employer, Bertie Wooster, are characters in dozens of little vignettes. Their stories are all told from the point of view of Bertie. I do readings twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays. If you subscribe to my Substack newsletter, you'll get notified of my updates as soon as they're ready. If you enjoy this reading or have other classics you'd like to hear, leave me a comment. Last chapter was all about a musical revue in the country and an orange fight. Bingo was involved, of course. Now we're back in town and meet up with Bertie's troublesome cousins, Claude and Eustace. Chapter 16. The delayed exit of Claude and Eustace. The feeling I had when Aunt Agatha trapped me in my lair that morning and spilled the bad news was that my luck had broken at last. As a rule, you see, I'm not lugged into family rows. On the occasions when Aunt is calling to Aunt like mastodons bellowing across primeval swamps, and Uncle James' letter about Cousin Mabel's peculiar behavior is being shot around the family circle, "Please read this carefully and send it on to Jane," the clan has a tendency to ignore me. It's one of the advantages I get from being a bachelor, and according to my nearest and dearest, practically a half-witted bachelor at that. "It's no good trying to get Bertie to take the slightest interest," is more or less the slogan, and I'm bound to say I'm all for it. A quiet life is what I like. And that's why I felt that the curse had come upon me, so to speak, when Aunt Agatha sailed in my living room while I was having a placid cigarette and started to tell me about Claude and Eustace. "Thank goodness," said Aunt Agatha. "Arrangements have at last been made about Eustace and Claude." "Arrangements," I said, not having the foggiest. "They sail on Friday for South Africa. Mr. Van Alstyne, a friend of poor Emily's, has given them berths in his firm at Johannesburg. We are hoping that they will settle down there and do well." I didn't get the thing at all. "Friday? The day after tomorrow, do you mean?" "Yes." "For South Africa?" "Yes, they leave on the Edinburgh Castle." "Well, what's the idea? I mean, aren't they in the middle of their term at Oxford?" Aunt Agatha looked at me coldly. "Do you positively mean to tell me, Bertie, that you take so little interest in the affairs of your nearest relatives that you're not aware that Claude and Eustace were expelled from Oxford over a fortnight ago?" "No, really?" "You are hopeless, Bertie. I should have thought that even you—" "Why were they sent down?" "They poured lemonade on the junior dean of their college. I see nothing amusing in the outrage, Bertie." Oh, no, rather not," I said hurriedly. I wasn't laughing, choking. Got something stuck in my throat, you know. "Poor Emily," went on Aunt Agatha, "being one of those doting mothers who are the ruin of their children, wished to keep the boys in London. She suggested that they might cram for the army. But I was firm. The colonies are the only place for wild youths like Eustace and Claude, so they sail on Friday. They have been staying for the last 2 weeks with your Uncle Clive in Worcester. They will spend tomorrow night in London and catch the boat train on Friday morning." Bit risky, isn't it? I mean, aren't they apt to cut loose a bit tomorrow night if they're left all alone in London? "They will not be alone. They will be in your charge." "Mine?" "Yes. I wish you to put them up in your flat for the night and see that they do not miss the train in the morning." "Oh, I say no." "Bertie?" Well, I mean, quite jolly coves, both of them, but I don't know. They're rather nuts, you know. Always glad to see them, of course, but when it comes up to putting them up for the night—" "Bertie, if you are so sunk in callous self-indulgence that you cannot even put yourself to this trifling inconvenience for the sake of—" "Oh, all right," I said. "All right." There was no good arguing, of course. And Agatha always makes me feel as if I had gelatin where my spine ought to be. She's one of those forceful females. I should think Queen Elizabeth must have been something like her. When she holds me with her glittering eye and says, "Jump to it, lad," or words to that effect, I make it so without further discussion. When she'd gone, I rang for Jeeves to break the news to him. "Oh, Jeeves," I said, "Mr. Claude and Mr. Eustace will be staying here tomorrow night." "Very good, sir." "I'm glad you think so. To me, the outlook seems black and scaly. You know what those two lads are." "Very high-spirited young gentlemen, sir." "Blisters, Jeeves, undeniable blisters. It's a bit thick." "Would there be anything further, sir?" "Well, that I'm bound to say I drew myself out a trifle haughtily. We Woosters freeze like the dickens when we seek his sympathy and meet with cold reserve." I knew what was up, of course. For the last day or so, there had been a certain amount of coolness in the home over a pair of jazzy spats which I dug up while exploring in the Burlington Arcade. Some dashed brainy cove, probably the chap who invented those colored cigarette cases, had recently had the rather topping idea of putting out a line of spats on the same system. I mean to say, instead of the ordinary grey and white, you can now get them in your regimental or school colours. And believe me, it would have taken a chappie of stronger fibre than I am to resist the pair of old Etonian spats which had smiled up at me from inside the window. I was inside the shop opening negotiations before it had even occurred to me that Jeeves might not approve. And I must say he had taken the thing a bit hardily. The fact of the matter is, Jeeves, though in many ways the best valet in London, is too conservative, hidebound, if you know what I mean, and an enemy to progress. "Nothing further, Jeeves?" I said with quiet dignity. "Very good, sir." He gave one frosty look at the spats and biffed off. Dash him. Anything merrier and brighter than the twins when they curvetted into the old flat while I was dressing for dinner the next night, I have never struck in my whole puff. I'm only about half a dozen years older than Claude and Eustace, but in some rummy manner they always make me feel as if I were well on in the grandfather class and just waiting for the end. Almost before I realized they were in the place, they had collared the best chairs, pinched a couple of my special cigarettes, poured themselves out a whiskey and soda apiece, and started to prattle with the gaiety and abandon of two birds who had achieved their life's ambition instead of having come a most frightful parlour and being under sentence of exile. "Hello, Bertie, old thing," said Claude. "Jolly decent of you to put us up." Oh, no," I said. "Only wish you were staying a good long time." "Hear that, Eustace? He wishes we were staying a good long time." "Well, I expect it will seem a good long time," said Eustace philosophically. "You heard about the binge, Bertie?" said Claude. "Our little bit of trouble, I mean." "Oh, yes, Aunt Agatha was telling me." "We leave our country for our country's good," said Eustace. "And let there be no moaning at the bar," said Claude, "when I put out to sea. What did Aunt Agatha tell you?" "She said you poured lemonade on the junior dean." "I wish the deuce," said Claude, annoyed, "that people would get these things right. It wasn't the junior dean. It was the senior tutor." "And it wasn't lemonade," said Eustace. "It was soda water. The dear old thing happened to be standing just under our window while I was leaning out with a siphon in my hand. He looked up and, well, it would have been chucking away the opportunity of a lifetime if I hadn't let him have it in the eyeball." "Simply chucking it away," agreed Claude. "Might never have occurred again," said Eustace. 100 to 1 against it," said Claude. "Now what," said Eustace, "do you propose to do, Bertie, in the way of entertaining the handsome guest tonight?" "Well, my idea," I said, "was to have a bite of dinner in the flat. Jeeves is getting it ready now." "And afterwards?" "Well, I thought we might chat of this and that, and then it struck you probably would like to turn in early, as your train goes about 10 or something, doesn't it?" The twins looked at each other in a pitying sort of way. "Bertie," said Eustace, "you've got the program nearly right, but not quite. I envisage the evening's events thus. We will toddle along to Ciro's after dinner. It's an extension night, isn't it? Well, that will see us through till about 2:30 or 3. After which, no doubt," said Claude, "the Lord will provide." "But I thought you two would want to get a good night's rest." "Good night's rest," said Eustace. "My dear chap, you don't for a moment imagine we're dreaming of going to bed tonight, do you?" "I suppose the fact of the matter is, I'm not the man I was. I mean, these all-night vigils don't seem to fascinate me as they used to a few years ago. I can remember the time when I was up at Oxford, when a convent garden ball till 6 in the morning with breakfast at the Hammonds and probably a free fight with a few selected costermongers to follow seemed to be what the doctor ordered. But nowadays, 2 o'clock is about my limit, and by 2 o'clock the twins were just settling down and beginning to go nicely. Oh, as far as I can remember, we went on from Ciro's to play shemmy with some fellows I don't recall having met before, and it must have been about 9 in the morning when we fetched up again at the flat. By which time I'm bound to admit, as far as I was concerned, the first careless freshness was beginning to wear off a bit. In fact, I'd got just enough strength to say goodbye to the twins, wish them a pleasant voyage and a happy and successful career in South Africa, and stagger into bed. The last I remember was hearing the blighters chanting like larks under the cold shower, breaking off time to shout to Jeeves to rush along the eggs and bacon. It must have been about 1 in the afternoon when I woke. I was feeling more or less like something the Pure Food Committee had rejected, but there was one bright thought which cheered me up, and that was that now the twins would be leaning on the rail of the liner, taking their last glimpse of the dear old homeland. Which made it all the more of a shock when the door opened and Claude walked in. "Hello, Bertie," said Claude. "Had a nice refreshing sleep? Now, what about a good old bite of lunch?" I've been having so many distorted nightmares since I dropped off to sleep that for half a minute I thought this was simply one more of them, and the worst of the lot. It was only when Claude sat down on my feet that I got on to the fact that this was stern reality. "Great Scott! What on earth are you doing here?" I gurgled. Claude looked at me reproachfully. "Hardly the tone I like to hear in a host, Bertie," he said reprovingly. "Why, it was only last night that you were saying you wished I was stopping a good long time. Your dream has come true. I am." "But why aren't you on your way to South Africa?" "Now that," said Claude, "is a point I rather thought you would want to have explained. It's like this, old man. You remember that girl you introduced to me at Ciro's last night?" "Which girl?" "There was only one," said Claude coldly. "Only one that counted, that is to say. Her name was Marion Wardour. I danced with her a great deal, if you remember." I began to recollect in a hazy sort of way. Marion Wardour had been a pal of mine for some time. Very good sort. She's playing in that show at the Apollo at the moment. I remember now that she'd been at Ciro's with a party the night before, and the twins had insisted on being introduced. "We are soulmates, Bertie," said Claude. "I found it out quite early in the PM, and the more thought I've given to the matter, the more convinced I've become. It happens like that now and then, you know. 2 hearts that beat as one, and all that sort of thing. So the long and the short of it is that I gave old Eustace the slip at Waterloo and slid back here. The idea of going to South Africa and leaving a girl like that in England doesn't appeal to me a bit. I'm all for thinking imperially and giving the colonies a leg up and all that sort of thing, but it can't be done. After all," said Claude reasonably, "South Africa has got along quite well without me up to now, so why shouldn't it stick it?" "But what about Van Eyston?" I said, "or whatever his name is. He'll be expecting you to turn up." "Oh, he'll have Eustace. Well, that'll satisfy him. Very sound fellow, Eustace. Probably end up by being a magnate of some kind. I shall watch his future progress with considerable interest. And now you must excuse me for a moment, Bertie. I want to go and hunt up Jeeves and get him to mix me one of those pick-me-ups of his. For some reason, which I can't explain, I've got a slight headache this morning." And believe me not, just a few minutes later, in blew Eustace with a shining morning face that made me ill to look at it. "Oh, my aunt," I said. Eustace started to giggle pretty freely. "Smooth work, Bertie, smooth work," he said. "I'm sorry for poor old Claude, but there was no alternative. I eluded his vigilance at Waterloo and snaked off in a taxi. I suppose the poor old ass is wondering where the deuce I've got to, but it couldn't be helped. If you really seriously expect me to go slogging off to South Africa, you shouldn't have introduced me to Miss Wardour last night. I want to tell you all about that, Bertie. I'm not a man, said Eustace, sitting down on the bed, who falls in love with every girl he sees. I suppose a strong silent would be the best description you could find for me. But when I do meet my affinity, I don't waste time. Oh, heavens, I said. Are you in love with Marion Warder, too? Two? What do you mean, two? I was going to tell him about Claude when Viter came in person, looking like a giant refreshed. There's no doubt that Jeeves' pick-me-ups will produce immediate results on anything short of an Egyptian mummy. It's something he puts in them, the Worcester sauce or something. Claude had revived like a watered flower, but he nearly had a relapse when he saw his bally brother goggling at him over the bedrail. What on earth are you doing here? He said. What on earth are you doing here? Said Eustace. Have you come back to inflict your beastly society upon Miss Warder? Oh, is that why you've come back? Well, they thrashed the subject out a bit further. Well, said Claude at last, I suppose it can't be helped. If you're here, you're here. May the best man win. Yes, but dash it all, I managed to put in at this point. What's the idea? Where do you think you're going to stay if you're in London? Why, here, said Eustace, surprised. Where else? Said Claude, raising his eyebrows. You won't object to putting us up, Bertie, said Eustace. Not a sportsman like you, said Claude. But you silly asses, I said, suppose Aunt Agatha finds out that I'm hiding you when you ought to be in South Africa. Where do I get off? Where does he get off? Claude asked Eustace. Oh, I expect he'll manage somewhere, said Eustace to Claude. Of course, said Claude, quite cheered up. He'll manage. Rather, said Eustace. A resourceful chap like Bertie? Well, of course he will. And now, said Claude, shelving the subject, what about that bite of lunch we were discussing a moment ago, Bertie? That stuffed good old Jeeves slipped into me just now has given me what you might call an appetite. Something in the nature of 6 chops and a batter pudding would about meet the case, I think. Well, I suppose every chappie in the world has black periods in his life when he can't look back without the smoldering eye and the silent shudder. Some coves, if you can judge by the novels you read nowadays, have them practically all the time. But what with enjoying a sizable private income and a topping into digestion, I'm bound to say it isn't very often I find my own existence getting a flat tire. And that's why this particular epoch is one that I don't think about more often than I can help. For the days that followed the unexpected resurrection of the blighted twins were so absolutely foul that the old nerves began to stick out of my body a foot long and curling at the ends. I'll have a twitter, believe me. I imagine the fact of the matter is that we Woosters are so frightfully honest and open and all that it gives us the pip to have to deceive. All was quiet along the Potomac for about 24 hours, and then Aunt Agatha trickled in to have a chat. 20 minutes earlier, and she would have found the twins gaily shoving themselves outside a couple of rashers and an egg. She sat into a chair, and I could see that she was not in her usual sunny spirits. Bertie, she said, I am uneasy. Well, so was I. I didn't know how long she intended to stop or when the twins were coming back. I wonder, she said, if I took too harsh a view towards Claude and Eustace. Oh, you couldn't. What do you mean? I mean, it would be so unlike you to be harsh to anybody, Aunt Agatha. And not bad either. I mean, quick like that, without thinking. It pleased the old relative. She looked at me with slightly less loathing than she usually does. It is nice of you to say that, Bertie. But what I was thinking was, are they safe? Are they what? It seems such a rummy adjective to apply to the twins, they being about as innocuous as a couple of sprightly young tarantulas. Do you think all is well with them? How do you mean? Aunt Agatha eyed me almost wistfully. Has it ever occurred to you, Bertie, she said, that your Uncle George might be psychic? She seemed to me to be changing the subject. Psychic? Do you think it is possible that he could see things not visible to the normal eye? Well, I thought it dashed possible, if not probable. I don't know if you've ever met my Uncle George. He's a festive old egg who wanders from club to club continually, having a couple with other festive old eggs. When he heaves in sight, waiters brace themselves up and the wine steward toys with his corkscrew. It was my Uncle George who discovered that alcohol was a food well in advance of modern medical thought. Your Uncle George was dining with me last night, and he was quite shaken. He declares that while on his way from the Devonshire Club to Boodle's, he suddenly saw the phantasm of Eustace. The what of Eustace? The phantasm, the wraith. It was so clear that he thought for an instant that it was Eustace himself. The figure vanished round a corner, and when Uncle George got there, nothing was to be seen. It's all very queer and disturbing. It had a marked effect on poor old George. All through dinner he touched nothing but barley water, and his manner was quite disturbed. You do think these poor dear boys are safe, Bertie? They've not met with some horrible accident? It made my mouth water to think of it, but I said no, I didn't think they'd met with any horrible accident. I thought Eustace was a horrible accident and Claude about the same, but I didn't say so. Then presently she biffed off, still worried. I'll pause my reading here for this chapter. The twins are on the loose about town, and it's only a matter of time before Aunt Agatha finds out that Bertie has failed his assignment. If you subscribe to my newsletter, you'll get notified of my updates as soon as they're ready. If you enjoyed this reading or have other classics you'd like to hear, leave me a comment. Check out my other posts on my Substack at ravensview.substack.com. Remember to share this with your friends. Ta-ta for now.